In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Hello, I'm Colleen O'Steen. This session of Older Women Likewise brings to the spotlight the book Sewell Hall by the Grace of God. Offering their perspectives on this work are Stephanie Massey, Dana Burk, and Julie Estes. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us for this session. Stephanie, what's occupying your time lately?
Oh, it's back to school time. So we actually just moved our son to Auburn to an apartment, and then this weekend, and then our daughter goes to school Thursday. So we've been doing all the things to get ready for school.
Oh boy. How about you, Dana? What's going on in your life?
Oh, school is all out of my life. Praise the Lord. We just got back this weekend, last night late from seeing our grandkids and watching our youngest grandkids who turned 14 on Saturday. We got to watch them play flag football. So that was fun. We were up in Atlanta. So that was nice.
Flag football is all the rage, isn't it now?
Yeah, it is.
Everybody's playing it. What a great game to open up to everybody, people that don't want to get clobbered.
Yeah, it's good. Well, and they're girls, so.
Yes, that's right. Julie, what have you got going these days? I know you got a full calendar.
Yeah, just finished up this weekend. My kids and my nieces are in a children's organization, and so we had a big event this weekend, and it was a lot of work and a lot of fun. I'm glad they had the opportunity to do it. And of course, we're gearing up with the new school year. We also start our new school year of Bible classes where we worship, and so all of that's getting kicked off this week. And so yeah, everybody's busy.
And you're coordinating which class?
The 1-year-old class.
What a great
you're
time.
A brave woman.
I enjoy it. I really do.
Yeah. What a great age to get that. Teach them to know God at 1-year-old. What a great thing. Well, let's get into the discussion. So, Sewell Hall by the Grace of God is a biography published in 2025 that follows the lives of the late Sewell and Caneta Hall, a Christian couple who dedicated time and talent to sharing the gospel of Jesus with others and strengthening Christians here and abroad. Let's get some general reactions to the book from our panelists. My first question is, overall, what is this book about? And what do you take away from the book in general? And I'll start with you, Dana.
Just not only their work, but the work of many other Christians. I really appreciated how Gardner, his son who wrote the book, included all the many workers involved all over the world that they were involved in. Evangelism is not a one-man show. It is something we all do together, and it takes all of us. And there were many special things to me as I read the book. I didn't even know the book existed, so I was really glad you passed that on. But there were so many people that were mentioned in the book that I personally know. And I remember all the things that were going on at those different times, and people that I have known for 50 years and have grown up with in the gospel all around the country. So that was very fascinating to me. And
often you hear these names, but I mean, over the years, a lot of the names have sounded familiar, but I didn't know, I didn't have a lot of information about what they did.
Yeah.
So this really kind of pulled it all together. And, I remember that guy. Okay.
We've moved around a lot, and of course my husband's a preacher, so there are a lot of those preachers but like there was one in Eastern Europe named Stephen Baxley that works over there. Well, he was a kid at church where I went growing up. Martha and Jeff Archer, I've known Jeff since Tall and I've known Jeff since before we got married, and just all of just a lot of different things like that. And Caneta, and I'll touch on that in a little bit later, but we had a relationship with Sewell and Caneta, so it was just a really good. I enjoyed that, and just looking at how many people are involved in spreading the gospel around the world. Yeah.
Julie, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the book, and I liked that it started all the way back with his grandfather.
Yeah.
And what led up to him becoming a preacher. And kind of like Dana, I don't know Sewell and Caneta. I met them, but I did not know them very well. But their three siblings I do know, and their children. And so it was fun for me to kind of see the background of that and see where their family roots were, but and how that influenced the way that they served God and the things that they did. And the other thing that really it made me think was some people do more in their lifetime than other people could even imagine doing. And, we feel like we're pushed to get everything done in the 24 hours we've got, but Brother Hall had the same 24 hours that I've got. And I can't imagine packing it as full as he did.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Stephanie?
Well, God has always used people to teach the gospel message. And this is just, I loved how this gave us a glimpse into how God used this family in his service. And not just this family, but so many other people. As a Christian, our world is very small and interconnected. Yes. And it was just wonderful to get to see how God used us, used everyone in very specific ways, whether they realized they were impacting huge groups or not. The Lord's been faithful before us. He's faithful while we're here, and he's going to be faithful long after we're gone. So, it's really cool to see our faithfulness to God and how that can impact more than the one person that we reached at that moment. It's just a really neat collection of his life and how he's touched so many people.
Yeah, a backstage view. Is how I like to think of it. Many of these preacher biographies, I like to read these. They all kind of give the narrative of their life and where they went and where they preached and what happened there. But this one does that as well. But it's also full of great stories. If that's what you like, great stories and colorful conversations and incidents that happen along the way. And one thing I cherish is the example of the tireless workers who had a love for Jesus and his work and just plain guts, a Christian work ethic that keeps me pressing on. Sometimes people are reticent about their personal struggles or just bizarre things that they go through. But I have seen this, later in life, they're kind of okay with letting their memoirs be published. Maybe not, it wouldn't have been that way when they were younger, but and then for some people it's after they pass away. But seeing the ups and downs of the lives of Christians is just fascinating to me, and I think this book feeds that need for sure.
Yeah.
Let's move to the theme of teaching the gospel abroad, which is front and center for Sewell and Caneta and the other preachers and Christians that were out there doing the same thing with them. So I each of you had a specific kind of location to focus on, really. So we'll start with Stephanie. Can you tell us about a location and the building up of churches there, the part that you read about?
Sure. So I read chapter 7, which was Eastern Nigeria, and Bill and Caneta, they were compelled to move to Eastern Nigeria along with their 2 very young children at the time in 1956 to help teach thousands of new Christians that resulted from a Nigerian restoration movement, which that alone is fascinating to read about how God used just one Nigerian man who thought the New Testament Christianity was no longer existed in a world, and how he came to teach thousands. I mean, it's just truly amazing. But I mean, they lived in a difficult area. It was the bush, there was no electricity. They had a kerosene refrigerator, Coleman lanterns, and nets to cover their beds to keep them from getting malaria from mosquitoes. And so, they were paid for their preaching with chickens and bananas and eggs and yams. And, they had to travel 80 miles to go to the market to buy canned goods, and traveling was difficult. So, just the fact that they lived somewhere that was very difficult, I think it gives us no excuses for evangelizing here locally. But they provided first aid treatment to Nigerians on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. They had a real problem with ulcers there, and so they had a sulfa compound that helped with that. They had malaria medications and peroxide, and it's, the locals, it said, trusted them more than the doctors. But death, it was very common in that area. And then Sewell dedicated most of his time during these 2 years to teaching men. He had about 50 to 70 students in Bible classes every day, and he spent Sundays traveling to different congregations to preach. And he said he often spoke from 3 to 5 different places, driving 200 to 300 miles on a Sunday. The Nigerians had to deal with pride and denominational concepts, and also the news of racial injustice in the U.S. Impacted their work there as well. But one of the neat things that I saw, that I read too, was about how they took a group of students across the Niger River to the edge of the western region of Nigeria, and founded churches in an area that had not previously had the gospel preached. So, they worked really hard to establish autonomous churches, and that was met with a lot of pushback. So there was a lot of conversation about that as well. So really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Julie, how about you? What was your area, and what did your research bring out?
So I focused on chapter 10, which is the western region of Nigeria. And of course, we know Nigeria, you may not know, Nigeria is on the western coast of the continent of Africa, kind of right where that crook is, that toward the north. And it was incredibly different from what they had experienced on the other side of Nigeria. They were in a large city. That city doubled in size within 5 years. 3 of those 5 years were years that they were there, which was 1960 through 63 that they were there. But it was incredibly different, very loud. They said everybody talked at the top of their lungs and yelled. And they would carry around their radios, playing them very loudly, honking their horns. So just the hustle and bustle of the city. And
it was in the night too, right?
All night, all day and all night. So yeah, just the hustle and bustle of the city was a lot. But then the sewer drainage was exposed down the sides of the streets. So the smell was just incredible, I'm sure. Totally different culture and language than they had encountered when they were on the east. So they went there after having been in South Carolina. And they really were looking to get back to a fast-paced teaching experience. And boy, did they. Wow. Very, very fast-paced city, and the teaching much the same, like Stephanie was talking about. But to go back to what you're saying about day and night, they lived in 2 different places while they were there. The first place that they lived was right on the street on a roundabout, and just extremely loud. They said they just couldn't sleep all night long. But they did find somewhere else later that they lived that was a little quieter. But for the preaching and teaching that they did, Brother Hall had a big red truck that he drove that was handed down to him from a previous evangelist that had been there, and it had speakers on top. So that anywhere they went, they were set up to speak. And he would just find places every evening to stop the truck and speak. But he had to try to find somewhere that had a large enough area for them to stand. And so that was always a challenge. And I know later we're going to talk about funny stories, so I'll tell you some more about that. But yeah, finding a place in a city that's crowded to be able to bring a crowd of people. But they would have 30 or 40 people every night listening to him speak. And typically at least one person that would like to be baptized, and they would also take names and information of other people that wanted to have continued studies. And so just really plentiful, the amount of people that wanted to come here. And I think a lot of that is the time and place. So in the 60s and being in an African country, but just amazing what they were able to do. They didn't encounter the same stuff that they did in the bush. It was just totally different problems, but they handled them with grace and, learning what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and how to live with these people and how to honor these people and be kind to these people and to the things that they come. I think one of the things was the Muslim people. And so he read the Quran on his way over across the sea to get to this place so that when he got there, he would be able to answer questions relating to that. And the people appreciated that he could talk to them about what he had read and how that compared to the gospel and what was written in the Bible. So that just the forethought that he had and how he prepared to be there and then the way they conducted themselves while they were there was amazing.
I'm sure the Quran is not an easy read either. So good that really did pay off for him. Dana, what about you? You're in Europe. You were looking at Europe. What?
I was looking at Eastern Europe, and this is a whole nother time period. This is in the 1990s, so we're coming up much later. So life in the States and life in a lot of places would have been a lot more affluent than even in the 50s and 60s that they were in Africa. But they actually never moved to Eastern Europe, as I understand, but they did a lot of trips to Eastern Europe. My husband and I have lived out of the country and worked out of the country and lived out of the country for years at a time. But we've also done these kind of trips. I'm not sure which is more difficult. They both have challenges, but they would travel. And the best I could gather from the reading is they did between 8 and 10 of these long trips, month, maybe longer at a time. And this would have been between 1991, 92 up until even 2005, 10, 15, somewhere in there. They traveled quite a bit. But one of the things that we saw happen, and y'all may not remember, I don't know how old you are, but anyway, in 1989, when the wall fell, as it happens, I had a group of foreign students in my parents' living room as we watched the wall fall, and one of them was from the Czech Republic. Wow. So that was quite personal reading this. And then a year later, we moved to the West Indies to work there. And that would have been in 1990. Well, guess where all the financial support for foreign preachers was going? Mm-hmm. Eastern Europe. So we
that little window of time, yeah.
And so we struggled while all the support was going to Eastern Europe. We struggled getting support. However, and my husband reminded me of this, I had kind of forgotten about it. During that period, so was all the support from the Baptists, the Jehovah's Witnesses, all the other denominations, even institutional brethren. All that support was being sucked out of the islands. And so we had so many opportunities open up for us for the gospel because of the work in Eastern Europe. Isn't that interesting how God?
Yeah. You just never know.
And in the 90s, Sewell and Caneta did think about moving to Europe a couple of different times, but there were so many brethren going to Europe and working that he felt it was just, the time wasn't right. And then he began to take trips, but he did a lot of work writing and making contacts to many congregations he had contact with, getting support and helping these brethren who were working in Eastern Europe. And then he went and held meetings with them. He went and did some of the street preaching that you talked about in Africa that was done. They handed out a lot of Bibles. It was very open, but he talked about how that window opened up and it just exploded, and people were so hungry for the gospel for just a few years. And then some of the bigger denominations came in with all the freebies and all the liberal materialism, and people began to lose interest in the gospel, period. In Christianity, period, because it was just so materialistic, which I took as a really important point. People are hungry for the truth, not all the gimmicks to get people to the truth. And when we water down the gospel, people aren't as hungry for it. And we found that in our work in the other countries. But churches were planted because, and there was a lot of rapid growth, and churches were planted all over the Czech Republic, Moscow, in Russia, or Moscow, Poland. There was Budapest. There was in Hungary. There was a nice sized congregation. He talked particularly about an area in Romania that they worked, and how very, very serious the Christians were there. And of course, then he talked about the different challenges, the crime. They talked about the crime in Moscow. One time they were attacked by a group of gypsy children, little children, that just swarmed them and tried to take their, they got his billfold, tried to get Caneta's purse, but she wouldn't let them have it. And just the theft. And one of the things Caneta said after that was, after the trauma of it all, was just how sad it was to her that these children had been born and raised to steal. That was all they knew. And we don't think about that so often. He talked about the persecution of churches and individual Christians. And
yeah, you wouldn't believe some of the things that happened to these people.
Oh, yeah, I would believe. I would believe. I've seen, and the corruption, and that's what I think we look at our government and we look at all of that. We think, oh, it's so corrupt. Oh, if you want to see corruption, just step out of our country for a little bit, and you will see it. And then they talked about the spiritual setbacks that always eventually come. And if you've been a Christian very long, you see that. Satan never quits, and he didn't quit with Eastern Europe. And as disappointing as it was, because it was like this huge spurt, and I think I remember in the 90s how brethren were like, oh, we're going to, the churches in Europe are just going to just explode, because there was this restoration movement, but it didn't last very long. But even with that, there are today solid churches worshiping there who are faithful to God. And as I remember a quote that Caneta made I think it was in Eastern Nigeria, after they had left and years later met someone randomly that they had known. And she says something about, well, maybe our time in the bush wasn't lost after all. And I look back at stories and that I could tell about experiences we've had, and I'm sure you can as well. But I remember going back to the islands for a visit, and a young man comes up to me and he says, Miss Burk, you don't know who I am, do you? And I said, no, I have no idea who you are. And this was 20 years later. And he told me his name, and I was just aghast, because he was this snotty little nosed his nose was always running, and he was just a brat. And he was the nephew of one of the members there, and he was always in trouble. And I always had him in Bible class, and he was it was just this little brat. And he said, "Oh, I heard you were going to be on the island today, and I wanted to come see you to let you know I'm a faithful Christian.
Oh.
Here is my wife, and she was just converted 2 years ago, and it's because of you that I'm a Christian today." Now that is worth everything.
Yes.
Put up with, and I could relate to what Caneta was talking about, and I think those are the kinds of stories that make it so wonderful. And there were some of those stories about brethren in Eastern Europe that have held fast, as you had stories from the countries you were relating to.
Mm-hmm. Let's change gears a little bit. Woven into that narrative of evangelism were various church issues of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And I think it always pays for us to refresh our minds on what these were about, and so they won't cause division later. So we do understand what was going on, and we can watch how Sewell's, especially his stance on these changed over several decades. One was institutionalism, and that is, in a nutshell, that's where local churches join forces to support a man-made institution like a school or an orphanage. So he was against this. In the biography, we watch as Sewell first says, when he first encounters this early on, he's like, I didn't even know what they were talking about, and because it was so new. But then over the course of the biography, we see how the way he refuted it at first was that he said there's no scriptural authority for it. Local churches are, quote, local churches are autonomous and restricted to the work laid out in the Bible. But then over time, he added the opposition that institutionalism is a misconception of the nature of God's church. Now, for many of us, it's easy for us to see that this issue is one that's been decided before we were born, and it's like, oh, it's black or white. However, seeing it as it unfolded for him over the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and how he matured in his stance is a really good example for me and for all of us as how we should stay with the difficult questions, maybe over the course of a lifetime, and build a comprehensive view of the solution. And there were some other issues going on at the same time: the social gospel, worldly thinking, entertainment, and dress. Those were things that were coming about in a modern, prosperous society. Also, one that he talks about that Gardner addresses at length in this book about his dad was how to educate and pay preachers in foreign countries who are converted by Americans. And there are differences of opinion about this. But he did point out some of the pitfalls of making it sort. He said if you bring them over to the U.S. for a special conference to study, and then we pay them from churches here, it's like an American church in Nigeria. The headquarters are here in the U.S. Right. And that's the way he looked at it. And he felt like in some cases it really did backfire on people. But I know others that don't agree with this. So let's go on to our next question. How does the Halls and others' work in the foreign evangelism field affect the way you look at the responsibility? Some of you have touched on this already. Are you energized by it to do more yourself, or overwhelmed at seeing all that they encountered? So let's start with Julie.
How could you not be energized, right? It's exciting to see someone else have such great success. It's exciting to see the gospel, rolling out to so many people, and it is energizing. To think about if it was something that I could do myself, I have to think harder about that. Am I the type of person that's suited for it? I do think that this book can really be something that could provoke many people to want to either go into this field or to support it in some way. There are so many different things from this, or people in this book that he mentioned that I think it was when he was going to Western Nigeria, it was when he was in Europe, that they were trying to decide if they were going to take a trip to Europe, and then got a phone call from someone saying, hey, I've got some travel miles on this airline if you've got somewhere that you want to go. And there you go, doors are open. That's one of those ways, things like that you don't even realize people are doing for these missionaries, that really pave the way for them when they're on the fence and thinking about what could they possibly do. And then someone gives them an opportunity like that, and so many other things that were mentioned in the book. That is someone being energized for this evangelism and for the furtherance of the gospel, and knowing that there is someone that could do that and how they can assist them in it.
Yeah. And I rarely hear a sermon about the gift of being able to make a lot of money. You know what? There are people that are really good at that. And of course, they need to use that to support the teaching of the gospel and the needs of the saints and building up the saints. And I think people need to look at it that way. Somebody looked at their miles and said, boy, I'd really like to go to Japan. And then they said, well, but we could use it for something better, of a higher purpose. And that is great. I love your point there, because some people are really good. They need to keep making their money. I think that's my opinion. They need to stay and keep earning that money and paving the way and paying for them to go and teach. People that are
Colleen, we there are a lot of Christians who make a lot of money and use it for that purpose that many of us have no clue about. The only reason I am, because we were beneficiaries of that. I could fill up pages of Christians, names of Christians who did things anonymously to help us when we were doing that. And I'm certain Sewell and Caneta could do the same. Interestingly, one of the things I put down here is I miss it for how I respond to that question. Did it energize me? Yes. And I miss being able to do what we used to do. Tall's health failed to the point we don't travel and do those things like we did. But while we were there, and while Caneta and Sewell were doing all this busyness that they were doing in the gospel, Caneta regularly sent me cards to encourage me. Now, that's and I knew what they were involved in. I knew how busy they were, and I knew how incredibly busy we were. And yet she found time to write me to encourage me. Mm-hmm. She knew how, and she was older, and she knew what we were going through with a young family out of the country, because she had done the same thing. They were incredibly thoughtful, and while they were doing all that, they didn't forget that there were others doing the same thing. And I always had a special connection to her because of that. That was so. I knew her personally, and we had spent some time together, but I didn't know her close like many people did. But that gave a closeness, a bond to me, to her, that I will never forget. Because
there was a case where someone sent him, I think it was $200, and they said, just go spend this on whatever you want. Just go spend it. And he was like, I know exactly what I'm going to buy with this. Now, I'm not going to spoil it. You'll have to read the book to find out what he spent it on. But just to think that somebody just sent him this money, $200 is, that's not a few pennies. And somebody did that for him and for his family and said, just go, whatever you need, just go do it, go buy it. Stephanie, what do you have to say about this question?
Oh, well, it's very energizing and overwhelming to think about what all they went through. And, they were met with opposition as well in their teachings, not only with their teaching, but also within other brethren that they were working with and teaching with, and different thoughts on different things. And, but the quality of the life that luxuries of life they were living with, but the biggest thing is it makes me realize that God can and will use us in all circumstances, whether we see it or not. God is able to use us, just like everybody can't go, but everybody can do something, whether that's teach someone here that may touch much broader group than you think, or that's supporting with, like you said, encouraging cards and sending money, doing different things. We can't all go, but we can all help. And, there's a lot of work to be done for God to do all over the world, but there's work to be done here too. And it's very encouraging to me that, they can go do all this in difficult situations. My most difficult situation is getting out of my own way and out of my being uncomfortable in situations emotionally, or worried about what someone thinks, so it gives me a lot of encouragement to see that, they did this, I can do this, and what I can do, how important it is to help and encourage them as well in this work, as when they are in difficult situations away from home and all the luxuries that we're accustomed to here in the United States.
And it is nice you kind of get to know them a little bit, and they had a great sense of humor. The whole family has a really good sense of humor all the way through, which that kind of endears them to you. I've read a few preacher biographies where the wife isn't mentioned much at all. So I love that Caneta is quoted and her stories told throughout the book. They are a team, no doubt. Now, I know it is Sewell's biography, but I would have liked to see more of her perspective on actually teaching the gospel from a woman's point of view. I don't recall anything, now I may have missed it, I don't recall anything about her teaching classes and the difficulties that might come, or surprises that might come from doing this in foreign places. Or even if she didn't teach, I would have liked to hear what it was like for her and other preachers' wives to go from Western freedoms to remote places where women are greatly restricted. At least I've been told that this is the case in some countries, like where the women have to sit on the floor for meals, things like that. I would have liked to hear a little bit more from her about these two things, her day-to-day life as far as her freedoms, and then also, more importantly, her teaching, any teaching that she did. So I guess we'll move on to the next question. I will admit that one of the features that kept me reading was the compelling stories that are stranger than any screenwriter could dream up. So we'll go back to our panel. Can you relate one or two that particularly caught your attention? Dana, do you have any?
Oh, I had so many. I think one that was so fascinating to me was in Eastern Europe, where they had worked with a congregation where they actually traveled over there in Romania, and they got in. She says, I think she's the one who says they were welcomed by this very warm group of people, and they were all mostly high school students, which I thought was fascinating. And they had been taught English, and she said it was the best English, or whoever they were quoting said it was the best English they had heard outside of the country. They spoke English so well. But then it talked about the persecution that hit. And if you would bear with me, I'd like to just read this paragraph. It says, the fledgling congregation soon became the object of persecution. Now, remember, this is mostly high school students. The mother of one of the teenage Christians became very angry about her daughter's conversion, did all that she could to stir up the police and the media the media against the church, Sewell said. She came and threw a chair through a window during services, caused all kinds of commotions. The police came, but not to support the church, but rather the mother. One Sunday, newspapers and television reporters came to services to give the church bad publicity. The idea that Americans were coming in and upsetting good Romanian families with all this religious cult. We were called a cult in a couple of places we worked, and there's just this aversion. And I think it seems to me the more good we're doing, the more Satan is fighting it. And you see that. It goes on to say in the next paragraph that there was a police informant that was implanted in the church who came, pretended to be interested in the gospel, asked questions, was baptized into Christ, and then started stirring up trouble and spreading rumors and gossip among the brethren. And it said that there were suspicions that were planted that years later were still causing problems. That's something that happens everywhere. And if it's not happening, then I think sometimes we might ask, why don't we have persecution like that? Well, maybe we're not teaching like that.
Yes, and he was definitely a plant. It wasn't.
No, he
wasn't innocent in any way.
Yeah, this was there was nothing innocent here. This was
Right.
a police informant planted within the congregation. I must say that's the first time I've ever heard of that one. We've had people throw stuff through the windows at church and break windows and, put sugar in gas tanks and et cetera, et cetera. But I've not had them put a police informant. And then it said, when thinking of the persecution Constanta, Sewell said, I think that's how you say the name of that town. They had a rough time of it. Things have smoothed out now. Of course, it was when they were having a rough time that they were having the opportunities to teach. Now they don't have so many. Once the persecution ends, people forget about you. So even with persecution, God makes it grow. And we find that in the New Testament. In Acts, you'd see persecution, and what would happen? Great many people became converted. They had when the dispersion happened, they went about preaching the gospel everywhere. Persecution is not always horrible. Or not always. It is horrible. I'm not saying, but it can bring. God uses it to his glory. Yeah. Stephanie,
what do you have? One or two?
Oh, yes.
Stories?
So one of my favorites is Mr. Estes, and he's from the eastern region of Nigeria. And this is just amazing to me how God uses so many people to impact so many others. But he was in the eastern region of Nigeria, and he had a dream one night. And it convicted him to the point that he decided he was not living a good life. And it convicted him to the point that he decided he wanted to devote himself to the Bible study. And as he was studying the Bible, he concluded that New Testament Christianity did not exist anywhere on earth, because he couldn't find anyone that was teaching New Testament Christianity where he was. So fast forward, and he decided he wanted to improve his English. And he enrolled in a course by the International Correspondence School in Munich, Germany. He was assigned a tutor, Anna Marie Braun, and he wrote to her on one of his correspondences, just purely on impulse. At the bottom of the paper, he wrote, "Do you know of anybody who puts out a correspondence course on the Bible?" And she replied to him, "Try the Lawrence Avenue Church of Christ in Nashville, Tennessee." What? So Anna had been, Miss Braun had been visited by some Christians at work in Munich a few days earlier, who were inviting people to a gospel meeting. And in an attempt to build rapport, one of the young men told her about a course on the Bible that Lawrence Avenue Church of Christ in Nashville, Tennessee was involved in. And with that, a Nigerian restoration was born that eventually brought Bill and Caneta Hall and their 2 young children to work there. It's just amazing what God can do. So, every little thing that you do, if someone hadn't been doing the correspondence courses, if someone hadn't gone to invite her at work,
like a cold call,
to a meeting, and if they hadn't just made small talk trying to make a connection, it's truly amazing how God can use his servants to spread the gospel. So anyway, that was one. And then there was another one, David Anako, who came to this is the one that Dana was talking about earlier. He pulled up to their house one day on a motorcycle, and he had heard that the Bible was being taught there, and he wanted information on it. So he asked them for their creed, to which Caneta said, "Here's our Bible. We don't have a creed. This is the only book that we follow." So after he studied the Bible with Sewell, he was baptized, and his children were about the age of Sewell and Caneta's children, so they would bring them to visit the Hall family. And 40 years later, when they were visiting a congregation in England, Caneta saw a Nigerian woman, and she was asking her where she was from. She was David's daughter, Ekaneta, who had visited Sewell and Caneta as a little girl and played with their children. And she told Caneta that her father, about his life and his death and the joy that their family had in serving the Lord. And that she told Caneta that throughout the years, whenever there was a dispute of any kind in the family, her father would say, "Go get the creed." And everybody knew that was the Bible. And so she said then that she considered that evidence that their time had been spent in Eastern Nigeria was brought lasting results and was well worth it. Okay. So anyway, all kinds of amazing stories.
Julie, what do you have?
Oh, like they say, there's a whole lot of them. One scary story, when they were in Western Nigeria and Brother Hall was out of town. I think it was a 2-week stretch for meetings, for gospel meetings. And their daughter Cherry got sick, and finding medical care just is not as easy in other countries. And so they found a clinic, but the surgeon was not available to take her appendix out. And so she had to wait till the next day. And so it was a much longer, harder recovery because the appendix had burst. But I can't imagine going through that night like Sister Hall did, having to just pray and read her Bible and just wait. And so time in the hospital after that. But when our kids get sick, we just want to run them straight to the emergency room and get it taken care of right quick and have the best available. And when you're in a field like that, it's just not always possible to get the care that you need. Like Stephanie said, when they were in Eastern Nigeria, they were the medical care. At least she had a clinic, I guess, to take her to this time. But that would be really scary, raising your children in a foreign country. And you worry about yourself and your own health, but you really worry about your children.
Yes.
But on the funny side of things, we were talking about the truck that he drove around, the red truck. They found a place to park at one time that they were very happy had enough space for people to gather around. But the people that were gathered around the truck didn't necessarily realize that it was right next to that exposed sewer. So they only preached there that one time because people kept walking around the truck and falling in the sewer.
Oh, that's not something we have to worry about here. Usually. No, but that just, trying to find somewhere to preach, first of all, it just amazes us because we can walk to any street corner and have plenty of room. But they had so many people in that city, and they were just stacked on top of each other, and just finding an area to preach. It's effort. It's effort that we don't even have to put out. Mm-hmm. The things you don't think about when they're in other countries like that, and places that they find that they'll not go back to preach again, like sewers. So it was just really interesting, all the different stories and the people that they met, and then met again later. As has been mentioned, some of the people in Western Nigeria, they had met in Eastern Nigeria, and so they got to renew some. Matter of fact, I think that red truck originally came from Eastern Nigeria. Okay. I think that we've really managed to fill up. I know we've had so much more to say, and we've managed to fill up most of our time. Do any of you have any other comments you'd like to make before we wrap up?
One thing I'd like to say, like Dana was talking about Caneta sending letters, they were very good writers. And that is one thing about this book that is really interesting to me, is that there are lots of quotes from letters written back and forth to each other and to other missionaries and people back home. And it really gives the book something extra because it's in their words during that time. And it's a beautiful viewpoint that we wouldn't have just by someone going back and telling the story. Yes, bravo. And that's back when people wrote long letters, and they saved them too.
You know, one thing that I would like to say is, and Julie, I think, kind of alluded to this, but you know, we lived out of the country. There are many who've lived out of the country, but Julie, like you said, that's not necessarily something everybody can do. And I think when we look at books like this and we look at people like Sewell and Caneta, there's a caution to not idolize those who do something, and don't misunderstand me. I think they're certainly worthy of our admiration. But we can forget, and I think like Stephanie said, there's work that all of us can do. We can forget that my little things are important. And there is work right here in my neighborhood, in my circle of friends. And God doesn't call all of us to go work out of the country. And he doesn't call all of us to be preachers, needless to say. And he doesn't call all of us to be missionaries, because if we were all missionaries, then who would be supporting those missionaries? But he does call all of us to work where we can and how we can. And if your life is not as packed full as theirs is, that's okay. Just make sure you're doing what God has called you to do. And you can, God's, you know, I tell people, we just lived our lives. And I think Sewell and Caneta just lived their lives wherever God led them. And you need to live your life wherever God has you put. And I think that's very important that we need to remember.
Yeah, that's a good thought to wrap up on. Shadowlands, the movie Shadowlands screenwriter William Nicholson wrote, quote, "We read to know we're not alone," end quote. This book provides this for Christians who face challenges and still press on. We feel better knowing what others have encountered, often more extreme than my experiences, but I just feel better knowing that there was somebody else out there that had some discouragement and disappointments, and maybe some victories as well. Thanks, Julie, Stephanie, and Dana, for your insight and observations on the book, Sewell Hall, by the Grace of God. And with that, we'll close this session. Take care.
Okay.